So for most of the units that we have covered so far for this 7th grade section of our curriculum, I think you had like some background knowledge. You touched on it in earlier grades when you studied science. I would say probably genetics. Probably you haven't studied very much or learned very much. Probably what you know is maybe just sort of general background knowledge that you might have. That's quite. So there would be probably a lot of new information here. So in our question today, most people had an idea about what genetics are, and you're correct in what your answers were, that our genes are information in our DNA that sort of makes us who we are. It's information that we inherited from our parents. It's what's passed on from parents to their offspring. And so we need to start by talking about where that DNA is. Where are the genes? So if we imagine, where would you find your genes? If we want to find someone's genes, where would you look? Yeah, where would you find DNA in a human? Olympia? In the cell. And basically almost all cells. Where? Let's be even more specific. Wait. What? Oh, there is? So, sort of. So, if you were to do like a DNA test, like a home DNA test like 23andMe, you do that by spitting in a tube, sending it away, and they analyze your DNA. What they're really analyzing are in your saliva, there are cheek cells that you sort of have come off your cheeks, and they have DNA in them. Basically, all cells have DNA. So in a cell, where would we find it? Let's be more specific. Kevin? In the nucleus, let's be even more specific. Wyatt? No? Leo? In the chromosomes. The chromosomes that are in our cell's nucleus, they're made of DNA along with some protein as well. But the chromosomes are what carries the genetic material. So chromosomes are in the nucleus of just about every cell. Now they look like these sort of X's certain times. Other times they might look like half of the X. Other times you look in a cell and you can't actually see the chromosomes. They're kind of unwound. But oftentimes you'll see them drawn as these sort of X shapes. Okay? These are actual electron microscope images of chromosomes. And they're found in the nucleus, as we said. And they're important because they contain the instructions about how a living thing is built and how it functions. Basically instructions to build you. From one single nucleus of one of your cells, it contains all of the information to build you, to make you who you are. Every single cell, basically, in your body has a full set of these instructions. And they're what's passed on from generation to generation. So, I'm not sure if you guys know, how many chromosomes would you find in a healthy body cell of a normal human individual? 46. So there's 46 chromosomes in one of my cheek cells. If I were to take out one of my cheek cells and analyze the chromosomes inside of the nucleus of that cell, we have 46 chromosomes. They come in pairs, 23 pairs. And why do they come in pairs? So I inherited 46 chromosomes. Where did they come from, Lara? Yeah, 23 come from each parent. 23 of your chromosomes came from your mother, 23 came from your father. Okay? We always share half of our chromosomes with our father and half with our mother. Even if people tell you look just like your mother or your father, you still have half and half. What do you think a mosquito has? Take a guess? Less? You think less? Yeah, you're right. They have 6 chromosomes. Just 6. 3 pairs. How about a chicken?
Ooh, 12.
12? Why 12?
I don't know, like, then they put like, it has to be even, right?
It does have to be even,
I'm at
correct?
24 in 12 pairs.
So here's the thing. Everybody's sort of giving me in-between numbers. The number of chromosomes doesn't actually mean anything. Okay? Chickens actually have 78. Goldfish have 96. So it doesn't have anything to do with the size of the species or its complexity or its intelligence. It just is a number that has evolved. So chickens have 78 pairs of chromosomes. I mean 78 chromosomes, 39.
I want to be a chicken that.
Yeah, they're all going to be even because you get one from each parent, with an exception which we'll talk about. So sometimes a doctor or genetic counselor, technician, can make a special type of diagram called a karyotype. Do you remember what what did that root mean? Karyotype. No? Oh,
Wait,
nucleus, yes. This is a karyotype. They say it's a picture of the chromosomes in the nucleus of a cell. And so if you take a picture of the chromosomes in a cell, you can then look at them and tell some information about that individual. Okay, so a normal human karyotype of a normal body cell, you would find 46 chromosomes. Okay. So this is a picture of those chromosomes. What they do is they take a picture like this, and they used to actually take a photograph on paper and cut out each chromosome and match them up into their pairs and arrange them by size. You could still do that. Nowadays they do it with computers. They take a picture of the chromosomes, they match them up and arrange them by size, and you get a diagram that might look something like this. And so this shows 23 pairs of chromosomes. Now they're not the X-shaped chromosomes, they're just the single strands because of when the picture was taken. Okay? And so 23, these chromosomes came from each parent. Now you'll notice that these chromosomes are numbered. Usually number 1 is the longest set of chromosomes, and then they get shorter as we move on. But when you look at this diagram, you notice the numbering and what happens at the end. X and Y. Yeah, we get to this set of chromosomes here. In humans, this is a special set of chromosomes. You see they're not labeled with a number, they're labeled XY.
Oh, female or male?
Yeah, these are called the sex chromosomes. It's a special pair of chromosomes. Usually on a karyotype, they're the 23rd set. And there's 2 possible sex chromosomes that a human can get. There's an X chromosome and there's a Y chromosome. So the combination of those sex chromosomes are what determine an individual's sex. So what combination are the male sex chromosomes? Male?
X.
Well, we need 2.
Oh, wait, what do you mean you need 2?
You get a pair of these chromosomes. So which combination would be male sex chromosomes?
XX.
XX? No, that's actually female.
Not
YY. XY. XY are the sex chromosomes for male, and XX can't. And we'll talk about Y in a minute.
Yeah, let's figure out one of them, right?
So those are the sex chromosomes. The other chromosomes are put on the karyotype in decreasing size. All right, so in sexual reproduction, as we talked about before, specialized cells are necessary. Okay? They're called sex cells, or they might be called gametes. In animals, we call them the male, the sperm cell, the female, the egg cell. All those terms mean the same thing. These cells are different from other body cells. And they're different because they contain only half the number of chromosomes. The process that produces them is called meiosis. It's a type of cell division that produces specialized cells called gametes, and they only have half the number of chromosomes as a normal body cell. So a normal body cell in humans, we said, has how many chromosomes? 46. How many chromosomes would be found in a sperm cell? 23. How about an egg cell? Also 23. They have half the number of chromosomes. Why? Right? Why is that important? Because what eventually might happen with this sperm cell and egg cell? Fertilization. And how many chromosomes will that have? 23 in the sperm cell, 23 in the egg cell equals 46 in the offspring, which is the correct number. So that process is called meiosis. It produces those gametes. So is this a cell from a female or male? Female. So when her cells go through meiosis to produce gametes, what sex chromosome can her gametes get? They're only going to get one of these. They can only get an X. Every egg cell has an X as its sex chromosome. However, when a male produces sperm cells, what can the sperm cells be? Some are X, some have an X sex chromosome, and some have a Y chromosome. Half and half. So if this sperm cell fertilizes this egg cell, it'll be a girl. How about this one?
Boy.
Also a girl.
Oh, girl.
What if this sperm cell fertilizes boy? So it is actually the male sex cell. It's the sperm cell. It's the father that actually determines the sex of the offspring. About half of all sperm cells produced by a man are X sperm, and about half are Y sperm. And so when that males have a Y chromosome in there, actually one interesting thing is, do you know what in vitro fertilization is? So sometimes if a couple is having trouble getting pregnant, they want to become pregnant, but they're having trouble, there's lots of things that doctors can do, but sometimes they might go and do in vitro fertilization. What that means is they extract an egg cell from the mother, they get sperm cells from the father, and actually fertilize the egg cell in a petri dish in the lab, and then they take that fertilized egg cell, let it start to divide into a tiny embryo, and implant it back into the mother's uterus, and she's pregnant. It's just the fertilization happened outside of the body. So they can actually now separate sperm cells by X and Y sperm cells. And then the parents can choose, do they want to use an X sperm cell to fertilize the egg or a Y sperm cell to fertilize the egg? So they basically can choose the sex of the embryo that they're going to implant. Yeah. What's that? They can test them and decide, yeah. All right. So sometimes these karyotypes are produced when a woman is pregnant. So when a woman is pregnant, they may want to look at the chromosomes of the embryo that she's pregnant with and look at them, and they can tell some things from us. They do that using an amniocentesis. An amniocentesis is when they use a sort of very long needle that they insert through the mother's abdomen, through the uterus, into the amniotic sac, and they can withdraw a small amount of the amniotic fluid that's in there, and that has cells from the fetus in it, and they can use those cells to make a karyotype. So they can do things like they can tell for sure the sex of the child, because they're going to be looking at the chromosomes. They can diagnose certain diseases or disorders as well from that fluid and from that karyotype. One example is Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is, so there are some chromosome abnormalities that can happen in the offspring. Okay? And the most common one is Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is a set of characteristics that happens when a person has one extra chromosome. And it's a specific chromosome. It's the 21st chromosome. So if you look at this karyotype, and we look at these pairs of chromosomes, and they look normal, and we have one of each, but we get to a certain point, okay, we get to 21, and look at this. There's 3 of these 21st chromosomes. And so that's a good question. I'll answer that in a minute. So having one extra 21st chromosome leads to some certain characteristics, some certain difficulties in development or with the development of certain organs that we call Down syndrome. There are other chromosome abnormalities besides Down syndrome. There's trisomy 13 and Klinefelter syndrome and Turner syndrome, but by far the most common is Down syndrome. And so, Will asked the question, well, how would an embryo end up with an extra chromosome? Oh, sorry. So Jake asked, so if we go back here, when meiosis happens normally, the pairs of chromosomes get separated. So 46 get separated into each cell for 23 in each. But every once in a while, the chromosomes don't separate properly. And 2 go to one cell, and none go to the other cell. In that case, if that happens, then that cell will have that sperm or egg size 1 extra chromosome. And if it's the 21st chromosome, and it gets fertilized and grows into an embryo, then that person would have Down syndrome. All right. Here's another example. Is this a male or female?
Male.
How do we know?
Because it's X and Y.
Right. We look at the sex chromosomes on here. How about this one?
Yeah.
Female. And again, if we look at this 21st set of chromosomes, there's an extra chromosome there. That's trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. So yeah, so it is passed by. So now if this person or this person were to have children, oftentimes though a person that has Down syndrome is not fertile. They can't have children, but sometimes they can. And so if they did, when this person, this is a male, produces sperm cells, when the chromosomes divide, 1 chromosome would probably end up in 1 sperm cell, but then 2 would end up in the other. So they might have another child with Down syndrome. They could have a child without Down syndrome. So you could have a Down syndrome father has a child without Down syndrome. Depends on sort of which sperm cell fertilizes which eggs. Yes?
Would it be possible to have an extra chromosome in the 14th?
So good question, Danielle. Yeah, so most of having an extra chromosome presents a lot of difficulties for the embryo. And so with Down syndrome, people are born with extra 21st chromosome, they live out their entire lives with that. But once you go to other chromosomes, there's not very many that result in an actual birth. 13 is the one I'm familiar with, trisomy 13. What if you had 2 extra chromosomes, or 3, or a whole extra set? Typically, if an embryo were to end up with a whole extra set, or 3 or 4 extra chromosomes, it just never develops into an embryo, and so it doesn't become an actual pregnancy. So there's not that many, and having more than one or having a missing chromosome doesn't result in an actual pregnancy. So let's just look at a couple examples here. This karyotype. Male or female? How do you know? They're not labeled. No letters. Because they're the same. The other thing, okay, so that's okay. You know by the 21st chromosome. Yeah. Now, how is the Y chromosome different from the X? The Y is shorter. So the X is this long chromosome. This is the Y chromosome. And the Y chromosome that males have doesn't carry very much genetic information on it. It's this tiny little chromosome, doesn't carry a lot of information. And so yeah, this one, like you guys were saying, this is a male. You could tell because the 23rd set are two different chromosomes. There's a tall X chromosome and then that little short, tiny XY chromosome. Anything else you notice with this? 3 21st chromosomes, that's a person with Down syndrome. You know, by looking at that 21st set. All right, let's finish up today, I guess, with
It was like one of the files where they like write down stuff. And it was something about a Latin name, and I just said Carl Linnaeus, and then I was at the kitchen at the table doing something, and Mom was like, "Did you say Linnaeus something?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You got it right." And I'm like, "Wait, what?"
really, that was the answer?
Yeah.
Final declaration?
Yeah.
Cool. I'll have to look up what the question was. Good job. Were your parents so impressed?
Yeah.
Oh, you must have an awesome science teacher. All right, let's finish up with this slide. So now we're going to start to talk a little bit more specifically about genetics. So genetics is the study of heredity. So what does it mean if, like, a disease, for example, is hereditary?
It's in your family.
Yeah, it's in your family, and it can be passed down from one generation to another. That's what heredity is. And so this gentleman here is Gregor Mendel. He is sometimes called the father of genetics.
Why?
Because he did the original research that sort of started to bring together the ideas about how traits are inherited from one generation to another. Gregor Mendel was a monk, a religious person. He was Austrian, not Australian, but Austrian.
What does that mean?
So he lived in Austria, Eastern Europe, and he was a monk, so he lived in a monastery, but he had some free time on his hands. And what he liked to do was he liked to do experiments with pea plants. You know, peas that you might grow in your garden. He did very detailed, careful experiments using peas that he was growing in his garden at the monastery. Because, you know, from our study of plants, plants reproduce sexually. And so he used these pea plants to help him understand how traits are inherited from one generation to another. Because with plants, what you can do is you could take a little tiny, like, paintbrush and rub it on the stamen of a male part of a flower and get some pollen on the paintbrush. Then you could take it to another pea plant and brush it onto the stigma of that plant, and you could basically make this plant reproduce with this plant and see what the results are. And that's what he did thousands and thousands of times. And what he did is he said, okay, I'm going to take this tall pea plant, take some pollen, put it on the stigma of a short pea plant. And then I'm going to grow the seeds that result. And I'm going to see, are the offspring tall, are they short, are they in between? And he did this keeping very, very careful notes. And he started to come up and see some patterns that allowed him to understand how these traits are inherited. He was looking at things like the height of the plant, the color of the flower, the texture of the pea. There's about 7 or 8 characteristics that he was looking at as he was doing these experiments. This was in the 1800s. And after taking careful notes and analyzing his data, he came up with some observations. Okay? What he said is, okay, these traits that he was studying, like the height of the plant or the color of the flower, it's controlled by 2 factors, and each parent is contributing one of those factors. So we know that today, each sex cell, each gamete is carrying with it one chromosome that has the genes for one of these characteristics. Each parent contributes one of those. He called them factors. We call them today genes or alleles. Contributes one of those, and that results in the characteristics of the offspring. Mendel's work, however, he was not very famous at his time, even though he's the father of genetics, and he came up with this really well thought out theory about how traits are inherited. At his time, he didn't receive a lot of recognition. It wasn't until the 1900s that people went back and looked at his work and sort of realized what he had done and put what he learned together with what they were learning about DNA and so forth, that he really became famous. So here's just an example. You just would take this paintbrush on the anthers of the stamen and then transfer that pollen to the stigma of a pistil of another plant, and you could basically breed these two plants very quickly, many times over, and just carefully study the results. We'll talk about what he actually found a little more detail tomorrow.